Because you choose for your instrument a boastful, lustful, smutty, infantile boy, and give me for reward only the ability to recognize the incarnation. Because you are unjust, unfair, unkind. I will block you. I swear it. I will hinder and harm your creature on earth as far as I am able.
When we last left off in the series, we followed Nigel McGuinness on his path to finally winning the ROH World Championship. The fulfillment of his time in Ring of Honor, and the validation of all the blood, sweat, and tears that he's poured into the company. Now, at last, at the top of the mountain, he can have the defining world title run that so many of the fans have wanted for him for so long. Except, that's not how 2007 ends for Nigel. After winning the championship from Morishima, the physical toll of Nigel's extremely hard-hitting style finally begins to catch up with his body. A series of injuries at the tail end of 2007 forced Nigel to miss key title defenses and major events for ROH. First, a torn bicep, then a broken nose and a concussion within the same match. All these injuries kept Nigel from maintaining the grueling schedule that ROH fans expected of their world champion, creating tension between Nigel McGuinness and the ROH audience. Despite this, Nigel continued to hold the ROH World title into early 2008, even as the distance between him and the fans began to grow.
You know what, screw you. These injuries are the reason I do deserve this belt. It's the sacrifices that I've made that allow me to stand in this ring as Ring of Honor champion.
Which brings us to the Manhattan Center, February 23rd, 2008. ROH's 6th anniversary show. The scheduled main event, an ROH World Championship match between Nigel McGuinness and Bryan Danielson. And yet, early in the show, Nigel comes out to voice some of his doubts about the main event title match.
Now, I wouldn't be so worried if it wasn't for the person who I'm supposed to be wrestling here tonight. But the truth of the matter is, Bryan Danielson is a reckless, dangerous human being. I guarantee you, he's in the back there getting ready now to come out here and hit me in the head with elbows, headbutts, and stomps. In the world. I'm the best in the world. Do you not even care about my health? You don't care if maybe 3 years I'm a dribbling vegetable with dementia? Well, if you don't care about me, I certainly don't care about you. And maybe I shouldn't defend this belt that you care about so much anymore. What do you think about that?
Don't you dare! Don't you fucking dare! That belt that you should be holding proudly has been around now for almost 6 years! And you know what? In those 6 years, it has been one of the most sought after, credible titles in professional wrestling today. And I'm willing to make a concession because these people paid to see an ROH World title match between Nigel McGuinness and Bryan Danielson. And if you're so worried about your head, I'm willing to not do the elbows. I'm willing to not kick your effing head in, okay? listen, if that's what it takes to get him to finally defend that belt in this building, I will do it. I will not do anything that I think is going to give you a concussion.
And so the stakes are set for the night. A gentleman's agreement between the two competitors. Nigel will defend the ROH World Championship, but in return, Bryan has agreed to avoid any offense directed at Nigel's head. It's a brilliant stipulation, not only calling back to Nigel's recent injury woes against Austin Aries in this very venue, but also playing on the history of brutal head injuries in the Nigel and Bryan series so far. How can Bryan adjust his strategy without the ability to go after Nigel's head? At this point, there's no more ambiguity in the crowd's feelings for Nigel. They have fully turned on him, mad at the champion for continuing to cling to the title despite his downtime recovering from injury, and now using that history of injury to create potential advantages in his matches. Meanwhile, Bryan's aggression for the championship has now transformed into an impassioned defense of what the title, and in turn ROH, represents. He is now, in the eyes of the fans, exactly who should represent ROH yet again as the world champion. Bryan even uses his former heel tactic of interrupting the announcements to play to his new babyface role.
And proud to be a part of this company for 6 whole years!
Nigel mocks the taunt as well, using it to steal one of Bryan's old monikers.
And the new best wrestler in the world.
The early feeling out stages see Bryan consistently outdo Nigel. Every time the champ tries to tie up the American Dragon, Bryan escapes with ease and regains the advantage. Bryan has an answer for everything that Nigel throws at him. Even by eliminating all his offense attacking the head, Bryan still remains one of the most proficient and skilled pro wrestlers on the planet, and he remains a legitimate threat to Nigel's world championship. Just as Bryan continues to build momentum, he nails a belly-to-back suplex on Nigel. Though the maneuver places most of its impact on the shoulders and the neck, Nigel claims to have been dropped right on his head. The champion claims this to be a violation of the terms that he and Bryan had set before the match, demanding that the match end by DQ, which cannot be enforced as the terms were set outside of the official rules of the match. So, Nigel knocks down the referee instead, getting himself disqualified in the process. No longer is this the determined, fiery competitor that wrestled through an injured arm and a busted-up face just to get to the top. Nigel has regressed, pushed by the fans back into his attitudes of old. This is Nigel as he was when he held the pure title, arrogant, bitter, and willing to do anything to hold on to his championship. He's worked so hard, so long to get to the world title in his hands, and he will do anything to stay at the top. Members of the locker room block Nigel's way out of the arena, forcing the title match to be restarted. Nigel uses the break in momentum to snatch away control from Bryan, going after Dragon's arm, a familiar tactic that Nigel has employed before. For what feels like the first time in their series, Nigel maintains a sustained segment of control on Bryan. His offense seems fueled by his hatred for the fans that have turned their backs on him. The frustration he feels for them gets projected into violence on Dragon. Nigel at his best couldn't do this, but Nigel at his angriest is something else. Bryan begins to mount a comeback with some well-placed kicks, but Nigel cuts him off by suplexing the challenger onto the floor. His stalling to jaw with the fans, however, allows Bryan to regain control. In a desperate measure to gain the advantage, Bryan dives from the top rope onto Nigel in the crowd. From here, the match becomes a much more back-and-forth affair as both Bryan and Nigel start unleashing their more devastating offense on each other. Just look at how Bryan sells this lariat. Beautiful babyface work there. Nigel nails Bryan with the Tower of London to the floor, knocking heads together, cutting Nigel right above his eye. Nigel seems strangely unfazed by the injury, though. Back in the ring, Nigel locks in the cattle mutilation, yet again stealing from Bryan to taunt him. He follows up with the top rope lariat and another Tower of London before locking in his new patented arm submission, the London Dungeon, only for Bryan to reach the ropes. Bryan starts laying in some of his bigger shots using a chaos theory to cut off Nigel's momentum. He lays in body strikes, notably avoiding his usual elbows that target the head before hitting Nigel with a super belly-to-back suplex and then locking in the cattle mutilation. When Nigel escapes, Bryan considers knocking Nigel out with the elbows to the head but refuses, following up instead with the tiger suplex. Bryan begins to throw his elbows, but to Nigel's ribs, still holding true to his word and avoiding Nigel's head. When he locks in the triangle choke, which he usually pairs with elbows to the head, Bryan again refrains, relying on the choke instead, but letting Nigel stay in the game. At every turn, Bryan refuses to go back on his word, protecting Nigel's head even as he attempts to wrestle the world title away. Bryan lays in a few more body shots in the corner, only for Nigel to headbutt him to knock the man down. Nigel lays in some more headbutts, even catching Bryan right in the eye that Dragon had injured when wrestling against Morishima in 2007. Nigel then uses Bryan's own elbow strikes against him before catching him with an elbow right to the eye and transitioning into the London Dungeon. Dragon has passed out, and Nigel finally claims his elusive victory over American Dragon. Nigel wins. But he needed every trick in the book to do it. He used Dragon's honorable agreement to avoid Nigel's previous injuries to handicap Bryan, only to target Dragon's own history of injuries for his gain. I don't think it's a coincidence that Nigel essentially won the match using a famous maneuver of Bryan's. It was the elbows that knocked out the challenger, not the London Dungeon that followed. Not only did Nigel have to sink to his lowest level to trick Bryan into a loss, he also had to pull from his own greatest enemy's playbook to knock him out as well. This might be my favorite Ring of Honor match of all time. It tells one of my favorite stories in wrestling history and is a shining example of the morality play dynamics that many have since tried and failed miserably to imitate. Nigel kneecapping Bryan by taking away his head attacks only to use headbutts to get the win ranks as probably my top heel move ever in the history of wrestling. This match was the pure magic that the best wrestling is made of. A babyface that's easy to root for, and a heel that's easy to despise. Few matches can attain such sublimity. 5 stars, without question.
I sat there not knowing whether she would return or not. I prayed as I had never prayed before. Dear God, enter me now. Fill me with one piece of true music. One piece with your breath in it, so I know that you love me. Show me one sign of your favor, and I will show mine to Mozart. I will get him the royal position. Enter me, please. Please.
Nigel would hold the ROH World Championship through the rest of the year as Bryan tried to work his way back into title contention. When Bryan puts the challenge out to Nigel for another world title shot on pay-per-view, Nigel sets the stipulation that Bryan must first defeat everyone that Nigel has defeated on pay-per-view. In the lead-up to that title match, the two would meet again in Tokyo, Japan at ROH Battle of the Best in a non-title affair. With the title not on the line, Nigel doesn't dig into his bag of tricks the way he did at the 6th anniversary show. What we get instead is another rendition of the Bryan-Nigel touring match, similar to the Survival of the Fittest match from last year. Less of a focus on mat work here though, as they do ramp up the greatest hits down the stretch. It's a great match, of course, but only on the borderline. Not essential to the narrative, but there's worse ways to spend your time. 4 stars. Of note here is that Nigel yet again mocks Bryan's "I have till 5" taunt.
We do. Clean break from Nigel, and he has until 5, referee.
It's a habit he's kept throughout his entire title run, even in matches that don't involve Bryan. Moments like this make it clear that the issue here is far more personal for Nigel than it is for Bryan. Where American Dragon simply has the natural goal of becoming the top champion in a promotion, Nigel is vindictive and bitter. He hates the accolades that Bryan receives from the fans even now when Dragon doesn't have the title. Nigel wants what Bryan has: respect, admiration, the claim to being the best in the world. Everything that the ROH World Championship was supposed to bring him. And yet, when the fans chant "best in the world," they aim it at Bryan Danielson, not Nigel McGuinness. Even now, champion for over a year, Nigel exists in Dragon's shadow. It certainly doesn't help things that the match ends with Bryan getting yet another clean victory over Nigel with a small package. No matter how hard Nigel tries, Bryan is the best in the world, and he's coming back for his title.
I must achieve his death. What? His funeral. Imagine it. The cathedral. All Vienna sitting there. His coffin. Mozart's little coffin in the middle. And then, in that silence, music. A divine music bursts out over them all. A great mass of death. Requiem Mass for Wolfgang Mozart, composed by his devoted friend, Antonio Salieri. Oh, what sublimity, what depth, what passion in the music. Salieri has been touched by God at last, and God forced to listen. Powerless to choose, powerless to stop. I, for once, in the end, laughing at him.
Bryan would finally get his championship rematch in Chicago Ridge at ROH's Rising Above 2008 pay-per-view main event. This would be the last time that Bryan Danielson and Nigel McGuinness would wrestle for the ROH World Championship, so it's fitting that they get to do it on a platform like pay-per-view. The first 10 minutes of the match are the standard fare for these two. As per usual, Dragon dominates the early moments of that match, always getting the best of Nigel as they exchange holds. Even though just the night before, Bryan got his leg targeted by Claudio Castagnoli, he seems primed to outdo the champion once more here tonight. Every time Nigel tries to get some offense in, Bryan has a response that leaves the champion flummoxed. Nigel finally gets the advantage back when he ties up Dragon's leg in the corner, before nailing his back kick downward lariat combo. Aggravating the injuries Dragon sustained the night before, Nigel goes after Bryan's bad leg with a meanness and brutality that really makes this Heat segment shine. There's an art to being a heel that's both not cool enough to cheer but not boring enough to ruin the match, and Nigel displays that perfectly here with his leg work. The match spills to the outside with Nigel still in control. As he grabs a chair to further damage Bryan's leg, referee Todd Sinclair intervenes, which allows Claudio Castagnoli to interfere on the ramp, stomping a chair into Bryan's head. Busted open, and now with a bad wheel, it's only with the help of one of the ROH Training Academy students, Alex Payne, that Bryan is able to beat the 20 count to remain in the match. What follows is one of the most incredible and well-performed finishing sequences in any match. Bryan unleashes a brilliant comeback where he infuses every moment with just enough selling to make every piece of offense feel earned. Bryan's firing up and struggling through, but you get the very real sense that he might be just one move away from losing everything as he fights against the blood loss and his injured leg. It's such a pure, emotional final 10 minutes of pro wrestling. One can't help but root for Bryan through all of it, desperately willing him on to take the title back from Nigel McGuinness. This might be the first time that the emotional core of the rivalry switches from Nigel to Bryan. This match has more to do with Bryan trying to regain the title than it does with Nigel's constant attempts to outdo American Dragon. Nigel comes out with the victory though, nailing Bryan with the Jawbreaker Lariat to get his first pinfall victory over Bryan Danielson. Another far from clean victory marred by outside interference and pre-existing injuries. Nigel holds the gold, but there are really no questions as to who the best in the world truly is.
All I ever wanted was to sing to God. He gave me that longing, and then made me mute. Why? Tell me that. If he didn't want me to praise him with music, why implant the desire? Like a lust in my body. And then deny me the talent.
Nigel McGuinness finally lost the ROH World Championship in 2009 after enduring another torn bicep on his other arm. Late in the year, news hit wrestling publications all over the internet that both Nigel and Bryan had both agreed to sign deals with the WWE, ending their legendary runs on the independent scene. To celebrate, Nigel and Bryan are scheduled to have one final match together, their concurrent farewells from Ring of Honor, in New York City at the Manhattan Center. It also marks the end of a month-long series of events deemed the Final Countdown Tour, Bryan's official month-long farewell from ROH and the independent scene. Nigel is merely the final chapter in the story of Bryan Danielson in ROH. Coming into the match, Nigel has visibly lost much of his muscle mass, as he has been unable to bulk up his arms due to the torn bicep he sustained earlier in the year. His style has also significantly softened. Throughout the match, he doesn't quite throw lariats with the same reckless abandon that led to him tearing both biceps in his arms. The match itself is nothing to really write home about. It's a greatest hits compilation with a quick reversal of roles as Bryan plays the busted open, concussed wrestler instead of Nigel. Bryan gets the win at the end with the triangle choke elbow combo. This match is only barely good, one of their worst affairs for me personally. Both men's stories in Ring of Honor ends here. For Bryan Danielson, most people probably already know what happens next. A long, fruitful career in the WWE, beating the odds to become world champion, a crushing retirement, and a triumphant return. A star on a new level, ascended so that all might witness his greatness. But Nigel McGuinness never wrestled for the WWE. He didn't even sign with the company until 2017 as a commentator, not as a wrestler. That's because in 2009, while completing his physical exams and checks, he disclosed his infamously torn biceps to WWE doctors who refused to clear him unless he got corrective surgery. Nigel's own personal doctors claimed that surgery was unnecessary and that Nigel was fit enough to perform. Still, the WWE wouldn't clear Nigel for competition. On the flip side, Bryan Danielson hid several details from WWE Medical, including his history of concussions and seizures. He signed and wrestles still on WWE television as Daniel Bryan to this day. Nigel would begin working for TNA under the name Desmond Wolfe later in the year. His run there would be cut short after he got diagnosed with hepatitis B. While he remains unsure of the exact way he contracted the disease, Nigel has gone on record to say that he is convinced that he got it while bleeding during a pro wrestling match. Nigel would end his in-ring career in 2011, following an international farewell tour of smaller independent companies in the States and in Europe. His journey gets chronicled in the harrowing and miserable documentary The Last of McGuinness. Much like Salieri in the film Amadeus, the documentary tracks Nigel's struggles with his own bitterness at how his career came to a close, and the envy of his much more successful contemporaries. Bryan's name comes up more than once in the documentary.
Dragon,
Yeah.
he was a nice guy.
Yeah.
I quite like Dragon. I done karaoke with Dragon. Good guy.
Wrestler, right?
Well, technically, I think Dragon was probably...
In every way.
Really?
In every way.
Where is Dragon now?
I don't know.
WWE?
Yeah, living on
Both Salieri and Nigel hit incredibly low points mentally, where they consider themselves failures and mediocrities at their craft.
You're merciful, God. He destroyed his own beloved rather than let a mediocrity share in the smallest part of his glory.
I'm tired of fucking bullshitting, pussyfooting around it. I'm just gonna fucking tell you how I fucking feel, and that's the truth. The truth is, it's bullshit. It's fucking not fair. I deserve that fucking spot. I was good enough then. I'm good enough now. It's just so damn unfair. And sometimes I wake up in the morning and I just feel sick when I realize and remember what the fuck happened to me. And yes, I know I've got no justification for feeling this way. And yes, oh my God, woe me, there are so many worse people off than me, and I get that. I understand that, but it don't make no fucking difference. I do know that my whole life seems like a fucking waste of time and a fucking failure, and it's all my fault and because of the choices I made that I'm stuck here. I get it. When I was young, I just had a dream. I wanted to be a wrestler. I wanted to prove that if you've got a dream, you can make it. And I believed that. And that is why I paid my dues and I made my sacrifices, and fucking God strike me down if I didn't just do my best.
The great tragedy for Nigel and Salieri both comes from their deflated sense of self. At different times, both wallow in a sense of failure and self-pity, mostly amplified by unreasonable standards that they've placed upon themselves. There was success. Nigel McGuinness remains one of the longest reigning ROH World Champions in the history of the promotion. As we've covered on this series, he has a backlog of some of the best matches of the 2000s, and that's just looking into one rivalry. There's so much more he's done that remains to be revisited and appreciated once again. While Salieri ends up sinking into his own hatred, stewing in it for decades to come, it seems that a brighter path opened up for Nigel. The night after his heart-wrenching breakdown, Daniel Bryan becomes the World Heavyweight Champion in the WWE for the first time.
Midnight on Sunday night, and Dragon just
became the world heavyweight champion in WWE. And he sent me a text message. Just says, "Hey Nigel, they just gave me the world heavyweight championship. I wish you were here to share it with me. I'm sorry that you're not." If anything, I feel a profound sense of pride. And we both went to WWE and we both had our tryouts and our medicals, and he was taken and bowed against the odds and proved to everybody that if you have a dream and you don't give up, you can make it. This is to my old buddy Dragon, without whom I never would have been half the wrestler I am. He made it. He really made it.
It's been a long and difficult path for Nigel McGuinness. While most reports and material show us that he's made peace with himself, I can only imagine that there are some days when the sting of envy and bitterness might rise again, however faintly. I personally hope for better days for him. His position in the WWE secures him a spot in the grander wrestling narrative, and while generations of fans will grow up knowing Nigel only as a commentator, those of us who know better owe it to everyone to keep the memories alive. Do not let Nigel's music fade into memory, growing ever softer and softer. It is a song worth remembering. Play on. Play on. Play on. Guys, thank you so much for keeping up with me as I completed this trilogy of videos about Nigel McGuinness and his feud with Bryan Danielson. In particular, I want to send a massive shout out and thank you to Benjamin Emerson, Psycho Driver 91, Goose Hudson, and Dennis Meha. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm sorry if I didn't. Thank you to all those guys for buying me some coffee, and a major thank you to James Draper for becoming my first ever monthly contributor on Ko-fi. Guys, we're in the middle of a global pandemic now. More than ever, I can understand that money is tight, so the fact that you guys send some my way just because I talk about wrestling, words can't even begin to describe my gratitude. You are all absolutely amazing. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. Most importantly, stay inside, flatten the curve, and help those who can't help themselves. Thank you all for watching, and have a good one.